is the GRE. And I have this on there. I know you guys all came because you kind of know what it is, but I had no clue when I first heard that I needed to write it. So GRE stands for Graduate Record Examination. And basically, it's a test that's standardized, so it allows schools to compare you to other students that have also written the test. How important is the GRE in grad school applications? I think we all have some interesting perspectives on this one, so maybe you guys want to go.
So we've all looked into different areas of psychology and different schools. Here, the GRE is weighted equally with your GPA, and it adds up to about 70% for both, and the rest is letters of recommendation, and then an advisor actually selecting you. Other schools are different, but here it's weighted completely equally with your GPA. So if you do really well on one, like you have a high GPA and not such a good GRE score, it can kind of balance out and vice versa. But overall, you do want to have a high GPA and an acceptable GRE score, which is different at different universities. But some of the lowest cutoff, I think at Guelph, it's 65 percentile for all scores, which is pretty obtainable.
So I was looking into clinical programs and social personality programs, and a lot of the schools that I looked at had really, really high GPA averages. So I have, for example, UBC, they wanted a 91% overall in order to let people in, which is difficult, but it is also doable. And then the weights of how much the GRE counts for depends on the school, and you're lucky if you can find it on the school's website. Sometimes I find it and then I can't find it when I go and look for it, but I know at some of them it's as low as 15%, most of them it's about 30%.
And I'm looking into school psychology, so that's a bit of a unique program in that a lot of them are just practicum based, so you're not writing a thesis and you don't necessarily need an advisor. So this is a case where you may want to try to get a bit of a higher score because it's something they're going to look at, and the pull of an advisor wanting to work with you is not being factored in. So that's something that you'd want to look at, although some school psychology programs you do also write a thesis, and in which case I think it would be a bit more evenly distributed.
And not all schools need the GRE as a requirement. For example, I have one, and that's the University of Ottawa. They don't care whether or not you write the GRE. So if you really don't want to write it or you really do bad, you can apply to the University of Ottawa.
But don't bank on that, it's very uncommon.
Yeah.
However, for school psychology, as far as I've looked, the only two that require a GRE are UBC and U of M. So that's something to consider. I know U of Calgary has a really good program that does not require a GRE.
Everything I've seen for cognitive psychology does require a GRE, and I think for clinical as well, except for Ottawa.
Yeah.
All right.
Study materials. I actually brought some to show you guys to see an example of what they look like.
In terms of study materials, there's a few basic ones out there. Kaplan and Princeton are the predominant ones. However, there are several others that you can find in like a Chapters or really any other major bookstore. I don't know what other...
I would say be careful in selecting your books. I got McGraw-Hill. It's the same as the test makers, but there are tons of errors in the answer key. So I wouldn't recommend buying the first book you see. I just went, most of them were cleared out, so I just took this one. And then I have a Princeton Word book, and this book's a lot more thorough than this one, even though this is just covering vocabulary. So look into the books you're buying, be careful. And if you think an answer you have is correct, and it's different in the back, find someone you know who will know the answer and double check, because you could be right.
I just went shopping on Amazon for my GRE books. I got a bunch of them. I forgot to bring them today, bummer. But both of the ones that I bought that were sort of math and verbal had lots and lots of mistakes. So you're going through and you're getting really frustrated. So that's something that you need to be aware of, like Sarah said, and be ready to go and check with someone else who will know the answer. I also got a little box of like words that you can sort of look over. It has the definitions on the back and you're supposed to test yourself. And they were good, but most of the words I already knew. And the GRE does have a lot of words that you haven't even seen before. So there are some suggestions. I know we've got some pretty good ones about how to sort of broaden your vocabulary and prepare.
Yeah, one thing is just read more rather than just studying the words. Look for different sources of information. Someone was suggesting reading different newspapers, things like that, and finding just things a little challenge your vocabulary. You might actually have to look up words. Reading in general is going to help you with the GRE, I think, almost more than anything for the book studying vocab.
Mm-hmm. And read when you're looking into supplemental materials. I agree. I did find that I bought the Kaplan 500 vocabulary and they were very helpful. For me, it was almost enough, but supplement your reading with high quality reading, so not just any newspaper. The New York Times is a really good one that tries to publish like well-edited, high vocabulary. And as well, there's also a lot of resources at the public library. I know a lot of these things tend to add up, and they've actually got quite an extensive amount of current resources, including Kaplan and Princeton. So as long as you know when you're writing it and when you want the books by, there's usually only 1 or 2 holds in line, and that's something that's really helpful to know if you want a more affordable option to help offset some of the costs, because even the test is very expensive.
Another thing that I found too was lots of the words, like the etymology of the words. If you know what it is, you can sort of figure out what it means. So I took a really helpful course called Greek and Latin Elements in English. Yes, and it's really great. It's got a textbook with all of these root words that you can sort of learn and then figure out what other words mean. So if you guys need an elective, take that one. It's very helpful.
Yeah, taking another language course in general, I find, is very helpful for understanding vocabulary and breaking it down.
Yeah.
However, if there are time constraints, that's not a requirement.
No. Just a suggestion.
Yeah. I know as well, actually, for study materials, a number of my friends have written the GRE as well, and they have found things like the GMAT to be very helpful, because the basic books out there do not give you hard enough math problems yet. They haven't published one that has math problems that are of the highest caliber that you'll see on the GRE. So something like the GMAT or the LSAT have good supplementary, LSAT for the vocabulary and then GMAT for math and both vocabulary as well as a website called Magoosh, which I've only heard amazing things about to help you. If you want some more helpful questions once you've sort of nailed down a process of a test taking, yeah.
And the GRE website actually has, I think, every single possible analytical writing question that you can get. So you can go through there and print off the full list and then maybe pick one that you can do every day and sort of just get used to writing really quickly about these different topics. So I found that helpful too.
Yeah, it's a very good idea to go to ets.org, which is the test-making site, or the company that makes the test, and actually get the test and material from that site, because you'll actually be getting real possible test items and actual test questions. And so I found that very helpful. Kind of in the last 2 weeks before I wrote the GRE, I actually downloaded an ebook, and it was so much more helpful than this book. As far as I know, the answers were correct, or they were logical, and it was a lot harder. So I think if I had gotten it originally, it would have been a lot more helpful.
And I know for me, like, I went through the list of questions and I did almost all of them, and then the one that I got was actually one that I'd done before, so I had a pretty good idea of what I was going to write.
Yeah. Helpful tips or tricks for studying? I would say, and I think you'll agree, is do an assessment initially, right? Write an exam right when you get the books and see what you have, what your strengths and weaknesses are. Actually read through the books. They have a lot of tips. Actually read them, because these are from people who have made the tests, so they're actually quite useful. And probably doing a diagnostic test is the most useful thing you can do at the beginning, because some people will be very strong in math and some people won't be strong in math, or strong in verbal and not strong in other sections. So I tried that right off the hop.
Oh yeah.
Yep. I also found this really cool website called This Minute in History, which was helpful preparing for the essay, because they like you to provide strong examples. And I found that if I watched this every day and picked out the few topics that I found quite interesting and decided to learn about them, those things stick far easier than trying to conjure up examples in your head. It's really interesting too. So I found that was a really good way to prepare for the essays.
And a lot of the books I can't remember which one I had, but at the very beginning it had a bunch of sample essays that people had written, real essays, and they go through them and they pick out all of the things that were wrong, and they show you what grade was assigned to each essay. So I found that really, really helpful. I sort of underlined the things that I was going to do that I knew would not be good, and then you can move on from there.
And for the essays, one more thing. Make sure that you practice writing them out on some sort of device that doesn't have spell check, because you won't get that in the GRE. And so you would be surprised how much we rely on autocorrect these days.
Especially for people like me who can't figure out the I before E except
Yeah.
after a C roll. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good tip actually, is not using spell check. Another thing is when you're writing the test, when you're doing practice tests, is try to create a situation that's going to be as similar to as what it's going to be on test day. So you're going to be sitting in a cubicle and it's going to be silent and you're not going to be able to get up and walk around. You can stretch, but even if you take your sweater off, someone will come and pick it up. So try to find a matched situation, sit at a desk, sit in silence, and actually time yourself. This is something that I didn't do, and I really wish I had. Just my timing worked out for me, but I did find myself scrambling at the end of one of the math sections because every single time I wrote it, I gave myself some extra time because I figured, oh, on test day I'll be faster. Well, test day came and I was scrambling to finish. So I would say be very rigid, set a stopwatch, and actually stop when the time goes out. And you will eventually get faster, or you'll be able to do it from the start, but you need to know.
Most of the books, if you buy one, will provide you with a code and you can have access to a number of practice tests, and those will have the time running exactly as it looks on your GRE, which is very helpful. So if you can find a place in the library that's silent in a cubicle and just act exactly as it would be on test day, it will tell you you have 10 minutes break now or you have a 1-minute break now. Then that's going to only benefit you when it's test day, when the nerves kick in.
I have a question. So when you're doing all this, it's all on a computer. So for math then, do you have like paper and pencil in front of you? Do you get a calculator? What kind of calculator are you allowed to bring in?
It's a bit, you can't bring anything in really at all. I'm not even a watch. So there's an on-screen calculator. They give you pencils and a booklet to write things out in. And they'll give you more pencils if you don't need, but really don't bring anything in. You can't bring a watch, you can't bring a pen. Water bottles you have to keep outside of the room. But they do give you an on-screen calculator. It's very basic. It has square roots and things like that and everything you'll need, but nothing too fancy. So I'd get used to just using a basic calculator when you're doing.
And like an on-screen calculator,
Yeah.
because that's different as well.
Yeah, and
You
a
have
lot
to
of
click it?
Yeah, a lot of the, you can type in some of the numbers. A lot of the books and things you get and practice tests will have the exact same setup. So
That was one of the things that I should have known from the start, because I sort of looked at the picture of the calculator and I was like, oh, it'll be okay.
No.
But I was used to using, you know, the Texas Instrument giant calculator with all of these fun things you could do.
Yeah.
And you get there and you realize, okay, I really need to know what steps I need to take to do this problem. I can't just press one button and make it magically happen.
Right.
So be aware of the calculator.
My number one biggest tip, though, I think, would be practice what you find difficult. And that sounds easy, but it's very easy to find certain things come naturally and then to want to do those over and over. Put that aside. The ones that you go, oh, I really don't want to do this, that's what you really need to focus on. And not only not only the answer that's correct, but how you arrived at that answer. Because that's what is really going to help you on test day.
And don't just do it and look at the answer and think like, oh, okay, that's how I do it.
Yeah.
Go back, redo it, do it in the exact steps that they tell you to do it, and figure out how to actually work through that type of problem so you can apply it to the next problem.
what was the most difficult part?
I suck at math.
Yeah. As do
So
I.
the math section was really hard for me, and I actually wrote the GRE twice. The first time I kicked ass on the other two parts, and then the math part was just awful. So the second time I went through and I only studied math. Through the book, I did this thing that I just told you guys to do, which is learn how to do the types of problems properly, and then it worked out the second time. But the math section was really difficult for me.
Yeah, especially I would say if you haven't taken a math class in a long time, because over the last 3 or 4 years in university, you're going to be doing stuff involving verbal reasoning and analytical reasoning. but you're not necessarily going to have to have done math. I actually graduated in 2005, so when I wrote the GRE, it was a long time since I had taken any math whatsoever, and that was a major disadvantage. So if you haven't done math in a long time, it will be a bit of a shock at first, and I would say if that's what your weakest point is, to really focus on it. I didn't focus on it as much as I should have, and when I wrote the GRE the second time, my score didn't really change. My other scores were fine, but my math stayed the same, and I really just didn't apply myself. So learn from me, apply yourself. If you can't do it or it's been a long time, don't get discouraged, but sit down and put in the effort and find out what's going on, like you were saying, and calculate, figure out why you're getting the answers wrong and figure out how to fix that.
I would say for me the most difficult part was actually time. I was consistently finishing my practice tests with ample time, but I was never feeling nervous, and then I got a ton of test anxiety on the day and found that that was the most constraining factor when I wrote my test. And I love math, so I just put that aside for the last 2 weeks, but I hate verbal reasoning. I am a science student, I don't understand poetry or underlying themes, so that's something that, but in exactly the same way, you see a pattern and a method that they use in the certain types of answers they're looking for, and that's what I chose to focus on.
And the other thing about the math is it's not the type of math that if you're doing your sort of stats stuff in psych, it's not that type of math.
No,
It's
not
like,
applicable to what we're doing.
It's like grade
Yeah.
12 pre-calculus sort of math.
it's weird.
But don't let us scare you from the math, though. These are just the sections that 2 out of 3 of us happen to find more difficult. It's going to be different for everybody, and you should just make sure you focus on your weakness, because as Erin was saying, it's kind of easy to do the sections you like over and over. Yeah?
I heard there's more applied math, so is it pre-cal or applied?
There's both, because it's more pre-cal in the sense that you're given a very basic calculator. So there is algebra, there's a lot of algebra that they like to do, which would be more common to do without a calculator in pre-calculus.
It's a bit of geometry.
But there's applied in the sense that there are some word problems as well.
But in the books, they do break it down for you. And they tell you you'll have 8 kind of this question, 8 or 9, and then I think 5 or 6 word problems. There's always 3 statistics questions, usually at the end. So it is like really broken down, and they'll let you know exactly what parts.
When should I read it?
I would say not in November, first tip. Not in November before the December you're applying for grad school. It's very stressful. I would say not even in the October if you're going to write it twice.
Actually, I checked the schedule. There's only one date from September to December this year.
Oh.
Yeah.
This year there were several. I know because I ended up signing up for the GRE pretty late, and then I ended up writing it again because I just didn't study properly for the math section. So if things do change from year to year.
Yeah.
I heard that as well. The test dates are really sporadic and weird. So it says you can write it every 30 days, but are you going to have the opportunity to do that? No. So my advice is to start early. After the school year ends, find one of the first test dates, start studying, get ready for that, and write it. That way, if you suck, you can write it again.
Yeah, because something could go wrong on test day, and you could be completely prepared, but then just be really sick, or have to cancel it for whatever reason. So just be prepared, write it early, I would say. But we had different strategies, because I was thinking you should write it not during the school year, but you wrote it during the school year, right? And you were saying that was...
The first time I wrote the GRE was during the summer, and I was on vacation when I was studying for it, so I was sort of in vacation mode. I didn't study very well. I wrote it, I didn't do well. And then when I wrote it again, it was in the school year, and I was sort of back into my study schedule, and I found it a lot easier to sort of get down and take the time to do the problems and learn. So I think we have different perspectives on that.
Yeah, so that's kind of a bottom line, is you have to figure out what works for you, so the earlier you start, the sooner you'll be able to figure out what does work for you and what doesn't.
In terms of signing up and scheduling, okay, you guys have told me some horror stories, and I know, like, Slade, got bumped off his scheduled day at one point. Like, what is up with that, and what is the risk of that happening?
That's the only case where I've heard of someone actually having a scheduled test date and being requested to move it. The only time that you would have trouble with signing up is if you sign up too late. I know I wrote the GRE in mid-June, and I signed up for it reading week. So not only was it beneficial because I got to have a lot of selection when I signed up, but it also helps you make this mental commitment that this is something you'll be doing. Your money's already down, and so you have to just really hit the books after that, which I really liked writing it in June. I know we have different opinions about summer versus school year, but what basically I did is, if you can, I'm the type that loves to focus on one thing. So right after I finished the term, I just went straight into studying for the GRE. So you're already so used to studying for exams that it was no problem to just sit down for about 5-6 hours a day. You're just studying one subject. However, the GRE has 3 different components. So if you're getting tired or fatigued from one section, you can always switch to a different section in the day. And so for me, that worked really great, was to have, like, I didn't work. I just did 5 or 6 hours every day. I took evenings and weekends off, and then the last 2 weeks before my test, I really studied constantly pretty well. But
I just wanted to follow up on the one session between October and December. They usually put up tests 6 months in advance, and because I wanted to sign up for August, and I had called a month back, and I was like worried because there was no dates up, and they were like, yeah, just wait till February to sign up. And then I did that, and I just signed up for August. So if you're wanting to do October, I'd say maybe wait another month, and then they'll probably be up for that.
Just one more question. Do you know how many schedule I can I don't know how fast. Like, can I schedule 2 tests at the same time?
not to my knowledge.
But you can, as soon as you write it, you can schedule. 'Cause
Yeah.
I actually signed up for the next one the day I wrote, because you do get your scores as soon as you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my scores, and then you get the option of sending your scores to university or not. One of my scores was low enough that I thought, okay, I'm going to write this again no matter what. And so I just went home. So maybe 2 hours after I wrote it, I was able to sign up again. So.
Okay.
But that is something to watch, like planning ahead helps, because if you can write a test date earlier, if you anticipate you want to give yourself the space to write it again, because I know that if I wanted to sign up for the GRE again, even though I wrote it in June, I can almost guarantee there'd be no spots in the summer available, because a lot of people like to write it in summer, but at least then I had the space, I could still book in the fall.
Yeah, I booked for October, which again, I don't think was a good idea for me to be studying and being in school. If you're in your 4th year especially and you're working on your honors thesis, it's really not ideal. At least it wasn't for me. And then I actually wrote the last possible date I could write and still apply to grad school, which was in November, and I don't think you want that added pressure on you. So I would write earlier for sure. I think we'd probably be the general consensus is write early.
In fact, if I knew more about it, I wouldn't have written it before my last year. I would have written it after my 2nd year, because really very little of what I was learning in school was related to the GRE. So, and your GRE scores last for 5 years. So if you're planning to go to grad school, it's probably not going to be years and years and years after your undergrad. There's no reason why you can't write it earlier.
That's a really good point. I would say if you can write it sooner, if you're not going into your 4th year next year, is to write it as soon as possible. Because it's true, it's not really applicable to anything you're doing in school, and you don't want to be writing an honors thesis or doing all your experiments and also trying to study.
How do you sign up?
Online.
Yeah. So there's a website, it's called ets.org, and you just click GRE in the corner. It's a pretty big button. I think it's blue. And then you
Yeah.
just create an account. The only thing to remember is when you're creating an account, and this is up there in huge letters, use your actual, real, full name, because they will compare that information to your driver's license information or your passport or whatever sort of identification you bring with you. So you have to make sure they match up.
Yeah, it's more strict than the airport. If you've, no, it really is.
It is.
It's very intense. It's very strict. Some, depending on who you talk to, they don't always have a sense of humor at all. So I wouldn't crack a joke.
Yeah, I've heard of like people getting fingerprints and stuff taken.
Yeah.
So,
And they take a picture of you when you first walk in and
Yeah.
I don't even know what that's for.
Yeah. And there's a video camera on you the
Yeah.
entire time you're writing. Actually.
yeah, your session is taped.
Why?
So
To
they
make
can
sure not
review
to-
it later.
Yeah.
Oh, so so then like what if you got a suspiciously high score, they'd want to know.
Just to see if
you
you've been
Done
cheating.
anything, yeah.
Yeah.
And then your scores are called temporary scores until they review the footage, and that's when they become official scores.
Right.
Can you request your footage just to see?
You probably can.
You probably can.
Yeah. But I don't think you should bother. You probably have to fill out a lot of forms and jump through a lot of hoops.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and then on this website, after you sign up, you create your individual profile, and then you can sign up for different tests. It shows you the test dates, and it's pretty easy from there on.
Yeah, make sure you write down your user code and things like that because you don't want to be scrambling to figure out what it is a few days before the test. From experience, I would suggest writing it down.
And you need to know that after to check your scores online,
Yeah.
so keep it.
Cost.
cost.
Okay. It costs about $185. I mean, the test website will tell you if that's changed.
Right.
Yeah, it was just 198. So it was 190 American and then 198. That's what I was charging.
So that's
Okay,
actually more
so
than it
it's
was
gone
when
up, yeah.
And that's not counting your books and things like that. So if you can borrow current books from friends, I would. The thing is, they might have a lot of markings on them, but you can just ignore those, and in fact, they likely will. But that would really minimize your cost because it is really expensive. And if you have to write it again, it's not like you get a discount price for buying more than one. You have to pay the full price again, so it's quite pricey. So, and be careful when you're buying the books. Make sure you pick the ones you are going to use, and not ones that have a bunch of flaws that you have to key.
You can even look, on Amazon, they have the reviews
Yeah.
underneath.
Yeah.
So I probably should have done that when I was buying my crappy books, but I've been looking afterwards, and there are a lot of reviews that are really helpful.
Right.
I rescheduled my GRE and it's an extra $50 on top of the $190, so that's.
Yeah, every time you want to move your test date, it is $50 to switch it. And then there isn't you don't get precedence on when you are able to book. You're just with everyone else looking at what's available there.
And there are only something like 8 seats per day, I believe.
Yeah.
It's a small little room. It's the same place for a bunch of other tests as well, like accounting and things like that.
Yeah, Kat.
Are the days that you write, is it typically a weekday, weekend, daytime, evening, morning? Like what, does it vary?
It varies. There's even Saturday. I think it's Monday through Saturday, not Sunday.
Yeah.
I wrote in the morning.
Yeah.
I think it's almost always
So
in the
it's
morning.
9 o'clock.
There's
Yeah,
2
9
test
o'clock.
times,
Mine's
or
at-
1:30.
Yeah, mine's in the afternoon.
So it depends. So even those sorts of things are good to consider when you're doing your practice tests. If you're going to write it in the morning, take all your practice tests in the morning.
Yeah, and get used to getting up early if you're not.
How to wake up.
Yeah.
Also, something Erin mentioned yesterday is if you're not used to drinking several cups of coffee, don't just drink a bunch of coffee before the exam. Try to keep your exam day as similar to your actual day as possible. If you do drink a bunch of coffee throughout the day, maybe bring a cold coffee or something in a thermos and you can take it on your break just to keep your routine. Or try to change your routine before the GRE, but a ways in advance. But just don't do things that are out of the ordinary for yourself.
They wouldn't let you bring coffee in.
No, they would never
No.
let you bring.
You are allowed to leave the room. You have to sign in and sign out, but your time won't stop. But you do get a 1-minute break between the sections, and then 1 10-minute break.
Yeah.
We both took all of our breaks. You said you took all of them?
I did not.
Oh, I didn't either.
I took none of my breaks the first time I wrote the test, and that was the worst call. So you're sitting there for
3.5
4 hours, and your legs start to get stiff, and it was because I was too nervous to get up and sign in and sign out. So don't be nervous. Go eat something. It's a good idea.
Yeah, you don't
Keeps your
have low
brain
blood
working.
sugar.
Again, do what you have been doing. So for me, I didn't take breaks apart from the 10-minute break because that's exactly how I had done it on my practice tests.
I took all of the breaks because I thought, why not? They're there for a reason, so just take them. But again, it is whatever you're used to. Try not to leave during the timing, though. I don't think that's a good idea at all.
Do you, do you have like just food or stuff that you can leave outside of that room that you then have access
Yeah,
to?
you get a locker.
What about bathroom breaks?
Again, either during the 1 minute or the 10-minute breaks, or you actually lose your time.
Okay.
So practice writing
Better sprint.
until that. Yeah. 10 minutes actually seems like an eternity.
It does.
Yeah, when you actually go to take the break. So
Even 1 minute, when you're sitting there and they're like, you have 1 minute, you're sitting there like.
yeah.
Yeah.
It feels
And you
like
can
a really
skip the
long
1 minute. You can actually cut it short if you want. But again, I would say take the breaks. But also, if that's not how you practice, that's fine, because you do want as much of a match between your practicing and your actual test.
I'm not too sure if this was in the slides, but where is the testing center?
In Meadowood.
Or centers? And it's just the one, right?
It's just the one right on Meadowood.
Yeah, it's right
The
from
St. Mattel Mall.
Sylvan Learning Center.
Find out where it is before test day.
Yeah.
Or leave with a lot of time.
Yeah.
There's lots of parking too, so don't worry about that
Yeah.
around there.
And Google Maps.
And one of the tips I read in my GRE book was to have something planned afterward, so you just sort of have something to look forward to. So knowing that, you know, at the end of the 4 hours when you're exhausted,
You come out crying. And
yeah. I mean, it could be anything. I went out for lunch with my mom, which is really nice. But I mean, just have something to get you through, kind of, other than just your goals and aspirations, because they might not serve you on this day.
That's actually the best advice ever.
No, really, it was advice in the book, so I made plans. I asked my mom if she would hang out with me. So, fortunately, she said yes. But I mean, you could do anything, even if you're, you know, I would just try to relax afterwards, because you're going to come out and, I don't know, I felt kind of sick after writing the GRE.
I burst right into tears. Mostly from exhaustion, I would
Yeah.
say.
But it's like when you first wake up in the morning, you just feel like you're gonna throw up until you get there, and then it gets worse. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Although, so trying to relax, one of the other tips I got was to try to read something else before you write the test. So don't have the test be the first thing you see in the morning. I grabbed the first thing I saw was a book of poetry, so as I was getting in the car, I was trying to read Lord Byron. It didn't really work out, but it did help to focus, and just focus on some words that weren't for the actual test. So, I mean, maybe choose something else, something that you've read before, or something that would be just more relaxing. But I thought that was actually really good advice as well, because you read a couple instructions and then you're going, and you want to make sure you're focused